Joining us now on Practical 365, from Quest this time, it's Bernie Saenz. Hi, Bernie, how are you?
Hey, Steve. Hey, Bastiaan. How are you guys doing? It's good to be here on the show today.
Good to see you.
I was going to ask you, what do you do then at Quest?
Yeah, so I'm part of our professional services organization. In my role, my responsibility encompasses leading the global project management practice for our professional services department. So when customers buy our products and they get a services package, we assign project management to those particular initiatives to make sure that they are going to be successful, closely watched over, and of course, all the way through the finish line. Another part of my function is overseeing our professional services operations teams, anything from our resource management and ensuring that we identify the right skill set for the initiatives, as well as working with our subcontractors, vendors, and other individual entities that also serve services for Quest.
So one thing that I experience on the partner side, obviously, is, I work with Quest myself. I never really have a lot of context into, what goes on your side. So although I'm not going to delve into too much about Quest, but it'd be interesting to know when you're working on large, say, international global projects, what goes into assembling then a team before we start talking about migrations and security implementations and so on. What goes on behind the scenes when you've got to get a big team together to help out on a global, let's say, tenant consolidation across 3 or 4 different continents?
Yes, that's a great question. And I'm so glad that you're starting there, Steve. At the end of the day, when it comes to these multinational implementations, selecting the right team is super critical for the overall success of the initiative. And again, we're so customer centric and passionate about the success of our customers that we always want to make sure that we select the right talent, right? So it's not just skill sets, it's years of experience. It's have they worked with somebody in that particular market before. So there's a lot of due diligence that we look into when selecting a resource that's going to be assigned. Do we need multi-global coverage? Sometimes, again, we have a global pool of resources that we can select from. Sometimes we want to be able to expedite initiatives. So we might have a follow the sun model, right, where we're doing some sort of work, in, like, let's say, for example, North America hours, but we want to make sure that we continue that in Europe, per se. So a lot of that is very carefully selected. And before we even get in front of our customers, we also have a very, a good dialogue with our sales teams to make sure that we get a little bit of a pulse on the customer, their experience, have they bought other products. From time to time, they might have had a failed migration that they were trying to do on their own. So they give us a lot of intelligence that really helps us to make sure that we're not just selecting the right team, but that from the very beginning, we're really focusing on the experience that they've had and how we can really elevate that experience as we deliver for them.
Now, these environments that you're setting up, these customer projects that are starting, are there any kind of recommendations that you would have? Because I understand that the challenges that customers face, depending on if they're doing a traditional migration or implementing security solutions, not only from us, but, a diverse section. What are your recommendations on how a customer starts to go about this, integrating with your team?
That is a great question. It all starts with understanding the business and the technical objectives, making sure that the goals are very clearly defined, particularly with the customer, right? Again, we're going to have a solid team from the Quest side, but we know that we're going to be integrating that team with some support internally from the customer side. So that stakeholder and user readiness is super, super key. We love to do, an introduction before we even do a kickoff for the project. With the stakeholders early on, including IT, leadership, some sort of a representative from the end users. And we began to really assess early on many different aspects of an initiative. One of the things is, for example, the change management. In the world of IT security, we want to understand, what is your change management process? What kind of security protocols do you have in place that we need to talk ahead so that we can make sure that as we're giving you guidance on all of the prerequisites that are needed to make sure that we launch successfully and we don't have a false start, that you have ample time to make sure that it's not just the team that we're bringing forward to work with you, but that you are basically covering your bases internally as well in selecting and resourcing and involving the right departments within the organization that are really going to be super instrumental to the overall success of that project initiative.
Now, with many customers looking at cloud, not only adoption, looking at their on-premises going to the cloud, but predominantly also in mergers and acquisitions, what do you see that the biggest challenges around data protection agreements? Traditionally, if you migrate and stay on premises, the data stays there. What would you actually recommend for customers that require potentially more legal advice to actually do migrations like that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. One of the things that we really love to allow our customers to understand is that, don't just invest on a migration, whether it's tenant to tenant or on-prem to a tenant on the cloud, but think through leaning into the opportunity to make sure that you can really modernize and secure before you migrate. As you guys know, some of these technologies are pretty old, and a lot of tech debt can be acquired, a lot of bad practices, a lot of workarounds, or just implementations internally in the organization to make things work. So we like to make sure that we're always allowing our customers to understand that defining the right security model, making sure that we're using Microsoft Zero Trust principles early on, looking for those compliance factors that are very critical, whether that's industry regulations like GDPR or HIPAA if it's a healthcare organization, and then think about how that also plays into your data loss prevention, right? Your email security policies if it's Exchange, and making sure that you are also bringing in the entities within the organization that are governing those policies to make sure that we're really honing in your environment. This is an investment that the customer is making. And what we really like to do, and that's why you will hire expert services, is to really come in and give you the guidance to make sure that you're not just investing on a migration from point A to point B, but on the other side of that, you're going to have a much stronger security posture, more resiliency, and you're going to be able to sleep better.
I would ask a question around that, because it must be quite difficult if you're not involved early on in the discussion, because I know from either working in professional services or being on the other side in pre-sales, where when you're in pre-sales, you can think and expand onto all the different things that you need to do, and you can think about those things. But when you're just sometimes the recipient of that, or you weren't involved in the conversation with the pre-sales consultant or with the customer before they signed on the dotted line, then it can be quite hard to sort of backtrack and add those things in. How do you deal with that apart from scream at the wall?
Look, it's very intentional in our project management practice.
Yeah.
One of the things that, when I speak to our project managements, I let them know, you guys, this is not just project management, it's project leadership, right? So we got to make sure that we, uncover, that we have the discussions that we need to have, that we are super intentional in making sure that we're bringing in the right people, raising the right conversations to make sure that early on, I'm a big believer on, I sound like a broken record and they know this, but you never have to recover from a good start, right? When you do your due diligence up front, and you make sure that you're involved. And this is very common. A lot of the individuals that sign on the dotted line are not the individuals that are now going to be working on the project initiative. So it's really important to make sure that we have handshakes and handoffs and that we're bringing up these discussions. It's very common to, for example, to get past contract and to have the internal discussion with stakeholders. And then you get in front of the technical team. And we know that we have to do our due diligence because they're going to be a little bit lost. They think very in simple terms, we're just going to check some boxes, open some firewall ports for you, and then you guys are going to do all the work. So really bringing this thing up, making sure that they understand.
Because this is the difference, is it, between, let's say it is a merger, and there's a busy IT team. They've got this on the list of things that might not seem that interesting, but there's perhaps there's buy the tool, do the migration. But the third way might be actually do the same amount of work, but make things better as you go. Sometimes that might not have been the thing that they asked for, and nobody suggested the third way, right? And it can potentially be an interesting opportunity to try and change that. When you're thinking about customers who don't get professional services in and are buying perhaps just the products from Quest, maybe they've used them before, got certified contractors in themselves or a partner, what advice would you think is the best thing that you could say to help somebody avoid those kind of mistakes if they're going to go it alone?
if they're going to go at it alone, I think that they need to make sure that they're involving, don't just do this in a vacuum internally within the organization. Make sure that you're very inclusive within the organization and bringing in the different departments, right? At the end of the day, we think of just the technologies themselves without really understanding all the intricacies. The application integrations, for example, is one big one,
Yeah.
right? A lot of times they might create a lot of disruption to their end user community because they were just thinking about this side of the technology without thinking about all the spider webs that are going into your daily production systems that are keeping your functions moving forward. So, doing an audit, doing an assessment, and then, seeking the feedback from other functions within the organization early on and making sure that we have a readiness plan or that they have a readiness plan and that at least everybody has signed off on that they feel that they're aligned, and to also embrace that, migrations can be complicated and things will come up, along the process. And if they haven't had those conversations early on, and they're going to come in last minute to have those conversations, you're going to have a little bit of disruption and it's going to be, not as smooth as it could be. So the biggest advice is just be inclusive, make sure that you ask questions, seek feedback, make sure that everybody understands, and also make sure you think of your change management, right? It's not just about getting through that finish line, but it's about the end user experience that you're creating, the support protocols, the communication, getting the leadership across the organization to be aware and to also promote, from those ranks, the changes that are happening. That's going to give you a lot more success over the course of this. Once an implementation starts to go bad, that can create disruption. It can be costly for an organization. Save yourself the headache. Just be inclusive early on, have the discussions, and have a good change management process leading you through that path.
So recommending, depending on the size of project, even small or big, your recommendations for communication is a vital part of every project, you're saying. What are the things that many organizations, small or large, usually forget? And what advice can you give them? What things should they think of that usually you find out that they haven't?
When you're planning a migration, Bastian, you have to evaluate the organization and the migration strategy that you're going to put in place. There's different ways of migrating. For example, if you're a smaller organization, a cutover migration might be okay for you. But if you're a medium-sized organization, you might want to stage your migration. You want to make sure that maybe you're doing it geographically, maybe you're doing it by function. You want to take into account, do I want to migrate my file? You'd be surprised how many times this doesn't get thought out early on, right? And we don't really drive that when we're not there. But if you change a finance function at the end of the quarter and you disrupt that, now you're going to have some issues, right? So thinking through all those little, nuances of a migration is extremely important. If you're going to be doing a coexistence of an on-prem to in a cloud, large enterprises per se, you want to make sure that you have a good, solid strategy. The other thing is, do pilot environment testing and test your migrations before you move forward, and make sure that you have signed off from the end user community representatives to make sure that they can really get through that. Sometimes things get missed and you just move forward thinking that everything is fine, and then you'll end up with a lot of support cases with the disgruntled end user community, and nobody really wants that. Particular IT, employees that are out there working in organizations, they want to have success and they want to make sure that they build a good, solid reputation in how they serve their end user community.
I mean, I'd add to that IT departments can sometimes pick the wrong groups of people to put into a pilot. Sometimes executives want to go first, and that can be a minefield, especially with, the amount of data, old data, but also when they pick part of the IT department as well. I can think back, maybe going back a long time, maybe 13 years or so, and a whole project was put on pause because this was an AD to AD migration with Quest. Tools were absolutely fine, but it was all put on pause because the team that they were using as the pilot was a group of developers. Mm-hmm. And they had a scenario and set of software that didn't exist anywhere else. But because they didn't migrate fine, then, everything else must be terrible. Yeah. Once we got past that and said, let's try a different group, everything was fine. Picking real people within the business and having a plan to overcome challenges as you go.
Yeah. I think there is this myth that if you select your IT community first for the pilot, that is going to be the highest level of complexity of accounts, whatever they are, whether AD accounts, exchange mailboxes, and the reality is that you got to have a good test base that really takes into account the different user groups during your pilot phase. That's going to give you a good sample, and it's going to bring things early on. If you focus only on one particular function and you work out those kinks and you think you worked it out for the entire migration, you're probably going to run into some, choppy waters, because you're going to identify use cases in different functions that you would not have, encountered if you would have encountered if you would have gone through a solid test phase of your migration pilots.
Now, in my experience, many organizations think that by installing software, that's actually, the most important part, because once you have the software, you can migrate. But I find that even smaller or larger organizations, the planning is the key and takes the bulk of the time for migrations. Mm-hmm. How does your organization fit into helping organizations do all the planning, find out, all the servers, find out all the configurations, potential applications mm-hmm. that they are running that, depending on naming convention changes, might not work in the new environment? How does your organization assist there?
Yes, Bastiaan, that's a great question. And I think that is one of the biggest values of actually engaging Quest professional services is we are doing this day in and day out. There is no environment that is the same, but there is nothing that we haven't seen. So we are very, because it's not just, like you said, installing the software and it works, it's configured. So we have, from the early on, we have a checklist, prerequisites that need to be put in place. Then we validate those prerequisites. We go through configuration testing. We start to identify things that we've seen in the past in other areas, and we start to feed that information to our customers so that they are very well aware of the things that need to happen. One of the big things that happens sometimes, where a lot of organizations might not really take time to plan, is when they really they think of the software, they think of moving, things from point A to point B. They don't think of the throughput and the bandwidth that is going to need, the network readiness that's going to be necessary to handle the workloads, right? The latency and the connectivity challenges that might come about, anything else that's going on in the organization from an activities perspective. Maybe you're having a huge town hall, with 10,000 employees, and you didn't think through that as you were actually going to be migrating. You thought it was a great time to do it because everybody will be busy on the town hall, but you didn't take into account that you were going to probably be consuming a lot of your bandwidth. Now you have batches that might be blowing up and not really going through. So because we've seen, there's nothing new under the sun for from a migration perspective that we haven't seen. And we bring that value forward and we allow our teams to understand. And a lot of times these are things that they will not be able to think about because, again, they're not doing this every single day the way that we are, and they're not accounting. They do this maybe once every so often, right? Yeah. That is the value that I think professional services brings to the table in helping make sure that there is safety in what we do when it comes to launching this type of initiatives.
I mean, one thing I know from similar planning of migrations is you end up with so many questions that you could ask up front that, I had a tenant migration survey, an AD migration survey, and they were like tons of pages. But actually asking the right questions up front guides you to the key 5-10 sort of questions that opens up how it's all going to sort of unfold. Is it 50 questions that need to be asked, or is it actually some simple key things up front that need to be known? Because I suppose that's the difficulty, isn't it? Knowing what to ask up front of your organization or the rest of your team,
right?
So that you can gauge how long this is going to take, so you can sell it to management for the thing that you're going to either buy in or thing that you're going to do yourself or get a partner in or question to help you with. And how do you sort of get there? Because it's, as I say, there's ways other than just getting somebody experienced to knock the door and have a look at.
It's not a one size fits all, so it's not like we have a cookie cutter approach that we really take a lot of time early on. That's why we try to understand the stakeholders, the environment, the technical team, the size, of the implementation, right? Is it just AD? Are you doing, Exchange? Is it, everything in there, right? Is it like Microsoft 365 as a whole? So depending on what, we will make sure we're very mindful of the time that it takes to do this, but we are very, very, our project management practice understands that if you spend enough time early on, making sure that you do your due diligence and you're allowing the customer to understand the whys we're doing what we're doing, the whys we're asking, and the outcomes that can happen if we don't do that effectively, it really empowers the individuals that have to go out there and make sure that they get the buy-in from other leaders and governance committees to make sure that they understand, right? So we are able to really, and again, we have a lot of lessons learned from past customers that maybe haven't listened to the advice and, the things that they ran into. So we have real life work examples of things that can go bad. And usually that is something that carries a lot of weight, and that makes that individual that's going to go out there and bat for that change feel a lot more confident and comfortable in communicating that and getting the buy-in that they need.
Are there any myths that you have to counter? Because I remember I went to a financial services institution maybe 5 years ago, and there was a person there, contractor that they got in, and I've done so many of these, no one would guess who or where, right? So I'm fairly safe in saying this. There's probably only one person else that would remember this. A chap called Mike, who was I think with me when we went to see the customer, and the customer's project manager / the contractor that they got in, I think he'd used another vendor's tools in the past. And he said, yeah, but the problem is in these kind of migrations, we always lose data. That's the thing. How can you guarantee that we're not going to lose data? And that was bewildering to me, because that was like, well, no, we don't intend to lose any data unintentionally unless there's a decision to leave something behind. No, we're not going to just lose 20% of somebody's OneDrive or email or files. And he was utterly convinced that this was the case. There was we're not going to argue over it. And that was the biggest myth I'd sort of seen. Do you have any myths like that you have to counter, or just get up, grin and bear?
There's going to be some instances where maybe you don't want to migrate. Maybe you have but what is your archive, implementation? What are the governing policies that are around that? And then also making sure that, in everything that we do, we always have a safety net to make sure that we can always roll back, that we can recover. So it can be different depending on the customer, but I think it's also very important when you're doing your data migration strategy assessment, right, to determine what is going to be archived, what is going to be left behind, and then more importantly, as I mentioned, the migration method. Are you going to do a cutover migration, a stage migration, a hybrid migration? And then how do you get there through a pilot? And how do you roll back in the event that there's any type of potential?
I absolutely agree. That's it's always part of the strategy, right? Part of your planning, measure twice, cut once, whatever you want to, call it, is to make sure that there's a rollback plan. I suppose for the last 20 or so years, Quest migration runbooks have probably featured the rollback part of something in a move of a migration, right? But that particular customer had about migrations. So when you do this, data always gets lost. But what did you do on the last migrations that you did? So that myth was, I'd just say, completely unfounded. Are there any like that you have where people or someone's been utterly convinced of something that you think, where did they get this idea from? That you'd want to counter straight up. But
sometimes customers believe that, allowing our expert services teams to have hands on the keyboard, is something that can be safer for them, as they're doing a migration, right? So this is what we call shoulder surfing. In this new world where we're tightening up on security, a lot of times, we won't get granted access. Obviously, we will still serve the customer and go through that, but it's not the expert's hands on the keyboard. And usually what we see is the myth that things is going to keep them more protected or less things are going to happen, usually end up turning up, and bad things actually do happen, and what I see most of the time is eventually you get to a point where they're giving us the access and then we can get through the implementation. So I think that's one of the myths that are out there that, you're going to have an expert, right? And obviously that's where we have contracts and liabilities and all the things that we go through when we engage. We are very confident in the expertise that we have, but that's a very common myth that we see actually flipped on its head many times.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's the thing. There's a reasonably good chance that the customer would employ the person and they're going to have passed the, if it's, for example, a government environment, then I know from talking to the folk that dealt with Quadratech managed service migrations years ago that they'd have in the UK security cleared people working on those projects. But yeah, from a consultant's point of view, it's quite difficult to be able to get on top of a problem if you can't see it, and you're just having to ask somebody to go and click through that perhaps is a lower level engineer that you've got on call. Sometimes an expert needs to dive in and have a look.
Absolutely.
And you can trust them that they're not going to just start changing stuff, because there's consequences to that, right?
Exactly.
For sure. But you mentioned something here, security and what you're saying, Steve. When you do large scale migrations, the tendency is that you can hide things. So if there is a bad actor within the organization, a lot of changes happen during these migrations. What are your recommendations for organizations? What should they look at? What should they potentially implement? Or, what would you suggest for organizations that are sensitive about their security? What should they also consider whilst migrating, whilst all these huge changes happen on a daily basis?
I think having a very close look at all the changes that are happening while you're doing a project implementation is very important, right? A lot of times, we'll start an implementation and we'll start running through our normal project path, but then you won't know all the things that might be changing behind the scenes that can potentially, end that. So a very tight change management control, not just from that governing board within the organization, but dual communication between that governing board and the different teams in the organization has been super critical. We might still get through our implementation, but there might be some other security exposures that arise in other areas that we're not even touching. So I think, again, going back to communication being the catalyst here and making sure that everybody's involved early on and that you have a good, solid strategy for all the changes that are happening.
It's yours if you want to.
Oh, we will obviously cut bits where we.
I was like, I didn't know if you were going to say something now. So
yeah, I was trying not to just keep on adding or whatever unnecessarily, because that was great answer, obviously, and there wasn't, I wasn't. I didn't have a follow up question to it, so because otherwise it just seems like we're throwing in things just for the hell of it. I'll put a marker button here so to edit it. But I'll say that again. Moving away from migrations, you get involved in new implementations of suites to do with security and overlay software that is dealing with monitoring the enterprise, right? So what's the sort of difference in those kind of projects? Because we've heard from the Microsoft folk and from MVPs on conditional access that it can take a bit of a different form. It's more like an agile project. It's incremental. Is that what you see with some of your projects, or is there a different view?
Well, in the world that we live in, particularly from security perspective, we're starting to see a lot more momentum taking off right now. So we have a new offering called Recovery as a Service, for example, where we will come in, assess your environment, implement our recovery products, do monthly check-ins, to make sure, things that have changed. And at the end of the day, it's an insurance policy where if you ever were compromised, all you have to do is just pick up the phone, and we are already aware of your environment, the changes, because we're checking in. We have a relationship with you, and we can actually recover you and save a lot of headaches for you. So we're starting to see a lot more momentum on that proactive. Organizations are being more proactive. We're starting to see that Security as a Service offering really starting to take off a lot. Because at the end of the day, organizations don't want to end up in the front on the front of the newspapers or channels like that. So it's really important. So I think that is one of the greatest things where we're starting to see that organizations are really starting to take this seriously in a world of cybersecurity, exposures and ransomware. Why try and figure out a strategy yourself, and why feel like you have to take that on when you know that you have a global organization like Quest Software who has been in this game for many years and has products that are tested, along with the expertise that comes along with it. This is how CIOs and CISOs can sleep better at night, knowing that you have a partner that can really come and really give you the protection that you need. So we're seeing a lot of those relationships starting to form, and it's really good. And it also gives us a sense of security, knowing that we can go out there and guard, our customers from ever being exposed.
Are there particular industries that are leading the charge there?
Healthcare, I think, is one of the big ones. We've seen a lot of, data. I mean, at least here in North America, it feels like every other week I'm getting a letter from one of the organizations that I do transactions with, letting me know that they've been exposed,
Yeah.
right? Giving me free credit monitoring, and that doesn't give me a sense of security. It doesn't really even want me to do business with that entity anymore. And
Yeah.
if anything, I want all my data, and I don't want you to have anything to do with me, right?
Yeah.
Organizations can take a real huge brand reputation hit when it comes to this. At the end of the day, relationships in business, just like in personal life, are built on trust. And if I can't trust you as an organization to protect my data, then I really don't want to do business with you, right? So I think we're seeing healthcare being such a critical industry, really taking a lot of measures to do that. Or healthcare organizations that are not are really exposed, to really being able to take a direct hit, not just in their business and what they do, but in the trust that they have. Financial institutions are starting to see that.
Yeah.
We're starting to see a big momentum there as well, right? A lot of regulatory around those areas, very little risk that they can take. So we're really starting to see in those areas is where we really see a lot of the individual markets that are really going forward and getting prepared.
So, I mean, I did wonder whether you'd say financial services, because traditionally, obviously, because of such regulatory oversight, I know in the UK, there's always, again, as far back as I can remember, one of the companies I worked for was a DR provider. I remember even as a customer going to visit them, and they'd show you like a picture of a server room on fire with a tape on top of it, and, all the sort of scare stories. But it's one of those organizations that had offices around that would serve as places for people to work in the event of a building burning down, that long ago, and would see that financial services institutions, the smaller ones in particular, would every 6 months have a day where they tested this sort of thing through. It's almost embedded in what they do. So I was, in a way, not surprised to hear it, but that indicate that some of these have been doing it themselves, but they're moving to bring it in as a service, right?
That's right.
Rather than
That's right.
just do it all in-house.
In anything you do, I think in life, whether it's as an individual or as a consumer, like I trust me, I try to do my own plumbing changes from time to time, and that has backfired on me. Why will you do the same thing in your organization, serving, thousands, if not millions of customers? Like, bring in the experts. The experts are going to give you, at the end of the day, you're going to suffer more. You're going to be more frustrated. So
For sure.
Save yourself the time and the energy and the potential brand hit that you could take, and come to Quest, and then be able to sleep at night because you have a team of experts globally that can come and support you in the event anything was to happen.
I suppose it's not just bringing the experts. You find, as Bastiaan said, when he talks to enterprise customers, that the person you talk to or the team you talk to might actually be the experts on this in their industry, but actually their time is better spent doing what they do, not dealing with this. They know enough to say, right, well, I know how to find the right organization to help with this. I don't want to do it myself. Not anymore. I've been there, done that.
Great point, Steve. Because even if you think of just being hypothetical, but a surgery, right? If you have to do the surgery, but at the same time be checking the medical records of your other patients that you're seeing, and then being called to do something else, and I'll just come back and get to the surgery later. Bad things can happen. You can't give 100% of your focus to multiple things, right? Something is going to hinder. The value that you have in bringing in somebody that's going to be completely focused on this particular migration or security assessment and remediation that Quest brings is by far one of the biggest values and best investments that you can make in making sure that you do it and you do it right.
But within your service, Bernie, especially when it comes to recovery as a service, how do you make sure that if a organization is completely compromised and encrypted, how can you make sure that what you're delivering is still available? How do you make sure that you can recover that organization's infrastructure?
Yep. So as part of our program with Recovery as a Service, there are certain activities where we create a little bit of that recovery plan, right? Things like backups, things like an understanding of the changes that are happening in your environment, the monthly check-ins that we're having, right? Having a partnership and a relationship with your organization. So it's not like we're going to come in and just wait for a phone call and just walk in blind. we are consistently engaged with you and understanding the environment. And we have the protocols in place that have allowed us in the past to actually recover our customers from some of those type of, breaches and initiatives.
What are the biggest lessons learned and recommendations you would give for customers?
Take this seriously.
Okay.
Take it seriously when it comes to, don't try it. And, we have a lot of technical talent out there in the world, but there's certain individuals that have certain expertise that do this day in and day out. Just like I gave the analogy of the plumber, right? I know that I'm going to be a lot more effective by hiring somebody to change my brakes than I am going down and trying to buy the parts by myself and trying to I don't do that stuff every day. I might actually be putting my entire family when they get in that car, in danger. Yeah. So save yourself that particular path, which nobody wants, and then be able to have security. And that's what Quest can offer you.
So I think we've learned a reasonable amount then in this episode, which is, some of this, I've done webinars with Quest before and said similar stuff, which is, you've got to think about the user experience and migrations, right? Not just the migration tooling. There might be things that there's not tooling that exists anywhere for in part of a migration, or a combination of different tools. How does that come to the user? How does it appear to them? Because you're going to inconvenience somebody during a migration. Often there'll be something for them to do, and you don't want to make people's lives miserable, right?
That's right.
Expertise as well. You can be an expert in a lot of things, but you learn enough to know whether this is something you should do yourself, whether you've got the resources internally to handle it, or whether it's worth getting some help in. And I don't work for Quest, so I can say, well, have a look around the market and see what's out there. There are very few organizations of obviously Quest size offering this sort of service, which would give me a little bit more confidence than a local partner offering to do the same, which probably means that they should be on your list. But the thing I'm not asking, because it's not us, we're not here to sell your sell Quest products, obviously, on the show, is obviously you need to look at, I don't know whether your DR as a service, what different things that covers, whether that is Microsoft 365, whether it is other third-party SaaS products, whether it's on-prem, Azure, AWS, if you're going to recover, there's probably a lot of moving pieces, different interdependencies with SaaS providers, third-party services that either you or that provider have got to know along the way, I guess, as well. My last question for you then before we wrap up is, how do you deal with that? Because as I'm sort of thinking it through, is that something that you have to point out to customers, right, out of scope, everything not listed here? How do you deal with that sort of scenario where we are living in that SaaS world where processes have a lot of interdependencies on things that might not be covered as part of a core DR plan?
Yep. Great question. Professional services falls within our customer experience, leadership quest. And that customer experience is not just focused around the services that we provide that you engage with us, right? We're a trusted advisor. We're not going to stick our noses in areas that we're not experts in, but we have enough experience to understand if there is some additional player that you got to bring in to make sure that cover. At the end of the day, we really care about our customers, and we want to make sure that they have not just a transactional relationship with us, but that they understand that we could be trusted, that we can advise them, and that we can point them in the direction to fill in whatever gap we feel might be a risk in what we're trying to do.
So the DR side of it's similar to the migration, right? Where you get an expert who's seen it before or got a team behind them that's seen it, been there, done it, and can say, well, I can see that you're using this. That you really need to think about what your plan is going to be for that third-party product, because often we'll see an integration because the customer, whoever's tasked with this, may have tunnel vision, or it's just not their area, right? Or it's a business app.
Yep. Yeah, look, environment assessments are key, not just in, assessing the infrastructure and the technologies that we're going to be touched, but even understanding a lot of the other potential applications and technologies that might be a part of that stack, supporting that infrastructure and running the operations of that business. So we take a look across the board, not just at what we're trying to do, and then we make sure that we can always advise and call out things. And in many times, ensure that, there's times where we're working with some of the other technologies firms that are working with them. And, so we're all about teamwork. We know teamwork makes the dream work. And ensuring that these implementations are successful is very important to us. So, for us is really not just being tunnel vision in what transaction we have with you, but at the end of the day, again, falling under the customer experience side of the house. I know my boss is always looking out for the customer, and making sure that, the culture of our departments, right? It's always very, customer centric, and making sure that things are safe and that we're really advising when we see things that they really need to take into account.
You sound very proud of your team.
I am so proud of the global team of experts that we have supporting, thousands of customers around the world. I got to tell you, our escalation volume is really low. The level of expertise that we built, particularly in the project management office, we have individuals, that have been in finance, that have been in different industries, that have came through the technical ranks, that have been project managements of huge enterprises, that have really seen a lot. So over the past 3 years, we have built such a global force, and we have such a strong partnership with our consultants, in our expert services teams, that it's hard not to be proud of the work that they do. They are the reason that I can sit here with you today and be confident, because they're just amazing. So, and they're just so focused on, pleasing the customers. I love our surveys that go out after our projects, and constantly coming in and being able to send that over to our sales teams. And again, our customers come back to us many times. They fall so much in love with the team that they get that they come and do business again. And one of the challenging things that we have many times is that they want to have that same team back. And we try to honor that as much as we can. And there's times where we can't.
I suppose that is hard to do, but it's a good endorsement, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I suppose the solution to that is get your PO in early.
That's right.
I used to work at a partner, so I've had the same question, because we've had those migrations where a team has just been the right team for it.
That's right.
Yeah,
you talked about mergers and acquisitions early. I mean, there's a customer that we have done now about they've been chunking up some of their competitors, and they've gone through 9 acquisitions. We're going on 3.5+ years of doing business with them, and they had their team intact. Coming in and doing this, and it's great. It's great for business.
Just keep the momentum going.
That's right. That's right. We even have some individual customers that will do staff enablement, where they fall in love with the resource, where we have individual consultants that are just fully dedicated, for years, 40 hours a week, working for that same customer on an ongoing basis. They're almost like just an extension of that employee company.
And I suppose
it's hard not to be part of that.
What that must mean then is that obviously your contact, the one that absolutely thinks the world of it, they're delivering success to the business, right? They're delivering on that promise. If they've went to the board or the CIO with this project, then they've been able to deliver on it. That's why they want the team back.
Absolutely.
That's often
one thing that I'll
challenging thing to do in IT.
Absolutely, I agree. The other thing that I'll mention is we've been very intentional from a customer experience perspective in bringing in the different functions that are very front facing with the customer. So if you don't have Premier support, you should. You're going to have a dedicated, customer success manager that's going to be checking in with you, point of contact that's going to make sure that you're getting the most value out of our products and our services. But you're also the support teams also fall within the customer experience umbrella, as well as our expert services. So we've really been extremely intentional in creating the type of environment and ecosystem where we know the pulse, and our customers know that they can really count on us to be there for them when they need most.
I think I need to find out a little bit more about Quest Professional Services when I do my next migration. But unfortunately for everybody listening, that's all we've got time for on the show today. So thank you, Bernie, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Bernie.
To serve you. It's been great. Hope to be back again soon. Take care.
And thanks, everyone, for listening.